Hello and welcome. Thank you for popping into my channel. If you are new here, please like and subscribe for me. If you find this content helpful, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on the next video. Comment below with anything that you need help with or topics you'd like me to cover. And head to my website, consultingninja.tech. You can check out the resources section I've put together there. With that out of the way, let's get straight to it. We are going to create a NodeJS Express backend to serve a small API. I'm also going to show you guys how to handle cores from the backend and how to deal with disabling cached responses from your backend as well. I'm going to be using Express Generator to get this going, and the source code for this, as always, will be available in my repository, and I will link in the description. Let's get straight to it. I hope you guys are excited. This is actually pretty cool stuff. If you've not done this before, you'll be surprised at how straightforward it is. Let's make a directory called API and move into that directory. Just do an npx express-generator, and it's going to install some things, but we still need to run npm i to install the dependencies. Then we can clear our terminal because I hate looking at all that. And inside of our IDE, we can come into our API folder and just start tearing this to pieces. We can delete all of the views because we're not serving any HTML files from the back. Inside of routes, we can delete the index because we're not using that. It is very helpful of them to have created a users because we are going to make use of that. We can delete the entire public directory because, again, we're not serving any HTML. Now we can actually get to doing something. Inside of app.js, let's just take a look here and I'll talk you through briefly what's going on in this file. This is basically all boilerplate. We have all of these requires where we're pulling in modules required to make this work. And then we have some routes that we're pulling from the routes directory. We're not using that index, so we can delete that. And then here is where we're firing up our actual Express application and calling it app. We're not doing any views because we're not serving HTML, so you can delete all that. Now here's where we're actually plugging in all of those requires into the Express. Here we deleted that index route, so we have to get rid of the use. And then all that's happening in the rest of this is that there's a little 404 handler function that's checking for any 404 not founds and then forwarding those to an error handler. We're not serving any HTML, so I mean, you could delete this, you don't have to, just leave it, whatever, who cares. Alright, so I told you guys I would show you how to deal with the cached responses. Now what I'm referring to is if a resource has not changed since the last time it was requested, you'll get a 304. And what that means is that the resource being requested has not been modified, and so the browser can feel free to use the cached version. We don't want that because there's a lot of times where a front end is going to specifically be looking for a status less than 299, because less than 299 means success for sure. Anything above that, it's kind of iffy. So we want to, well, I'm sorry, not use. We want to disable our app's ability to do that, and so we're going to do app.disable, and then in here you just put etag. And now we don't have to worry about the browser getting a cached or not modified response and then wanting it to use the cached values. Inside of our bin, there is a www file, and in here you can see we're just bringing in the app file that we've defined in that app.js. Debug is just some stuff for debugging. This is a standard HTTP node module. Here though, we do want to point out something very important here. This is where the port that's going to be used for this server is defined. If you have an environment variable set, that's the first thing that it's going to use. If that's not set, then it will use this string. I always leave the environment variable there, and I typically use port 8080, and that's because the default, if you noticed, was 3000, and React applications are served on 3000. So if you left that like that, and you had your React application running and you tried to fire this up, you would get this error. So here's this on error function down here. You'd get this message because that address would have already been in use. So we need to set that port here to something other than 3000. If you have issues with that port, or if you have issues with the environment variable being set to something other than 8080 or something other than what you want, just delete that out and have it statically written in as whatever you'd like. Okay, so the rest of this is all basic stuff. We're just firing up the server and telling it to listen on the port defined above. Here's where we're checking to make sure that port is actually a number, and then that error function that I was telling you will yell at you if you've messed up. Down in the bottom though, there's this function on listening. Here, I'm not sure of all the boilerplate that they put in here, why they did not think to add some simple messaging in here, but if you don't put a console log in here, when you fire the server up, you're going to be like scratching your head wondering why it's just locked up. It's not locked up, it actually is running, but we won't know it unless we add a console.log here. And let's say server is running on ... and then outside do a comma and then port. So we can spit out the port and make sure it's running on the port that we would like. Go ahead and give that a save, and then let's go to our terminal and making sure we're inside the directory that has all that, do an npm start. And you can see our server is in fact running on port 8080. Congratulations, 7 minutes and 30 seconds in, and you have successfully created a Node Express backend. Now it's not doing much right now, but that won't be the case forever. Let's shut this down and go take a look at the next thing that we need to do, and that is to define our route. Now inside of app.js, you can see we're already importing that users file here, var users router equals require, and then that file. And then once you bring it in, you do an app.use, and then you're telling it what route you want it to live on. Here we want it to equal the file name, which makes sense. So the way that routes work, you can think of this as basically your URL. And so you'd have your IP address or URL. Your base URL would just be slash, and then slash is any routes. So the base one is just slash, so your IP address or your domain name is slash, and then any other routes that you're defining in your API have to have some sort of distinguishing slash users, slash user, or slash products, whatever the case may be. Inside of our users file, this is where the actual route, like what happens in that route, gets defined. Here you can see we're bringing in just express and router from there. And then we have a router.get. This is the method that it's going to be listening for on that route. So if you send a post request to this, it's not going to work because this is looking for GET requests. And then here I'll also point out, you can see this is a slash. This is users base. If you wanted to split up users to something else or add more to it, so slash users slash something else, you can just copy and paste this and do, slash users slash whatever else. In order to ping this one, when you hit from the front, you would do a fetch, your IP address slash users, because that's what's defined in app.use, and then slash whatever else it is you want. And we're not going to do that. We're just going to keep things simple. So the other thing that I told you I would help you guys deal with is cores. Now, if you've programmed on the front at all, you've done any sort of web development, I don't need to tell you what a pain in the butt cores can be. I'm sure if you've done development that you've banged your head on the keyboard several times working with cores and trying to figure out how to get around it. The end result is this. The real reason why you get that cores error is because the person whose API or website you're trying to hit with a fetch doesn't have the proper headers set up on their server. For us, we only want to allow one person to access our API, and so it's just super simple. All we need to do to get around cores is do we want to do this before we send anything. So let me point that out. Do a response.header, and then we're manually adding this header. Access control allow origin. Now, if you have a public API that you're wanting to be available to members of the public, then you need to set this up with an asterisk. Okay? If you get that cross-origin error in your browser and you're trying to access someone else's resource that you don't control, like it's not your backend, and you're getting that error, it's because they don't have their headers set up correctly on their server. So if you want to make your API available publicly, you need to let every origin access it, and then you can filter by some other criteria later. So you don't have to actually send the data back. You can say response.header, allow origin all, and then filter again by IP address. So if you wanted, only certain IP addresses, or you wanted to filter by country of origin IP, you can pull out the IP address easily here, saying in request.ip, and do whatever you want with that. Run it against a list, however you'd like to filter, but you need to make sure that it is set. For us, we don't want to make this publicly available, and we're going to be pinging this from our locally developed application, and so we just need to do an http://localhost, and then I'm going to be using a Vite application, so I do a 5173. So no problem there. And then we're going to send some JSON, and so we can get rid of this, keep this send, just do a response.json. And then here, let's type users. And then we need to define some users. So let's do a const users is assigned. And I'm not going to type all this out because that's going to take a while. I don't want to bore you guys with that. I'll just copy and paste from this little notepad here. Again, the source will be available in my GitHub, so you can copy and paste from there as well. If you wanted to add any sort of messaging when this gets hit, you could put that in here. Although anytime your Node server is hit on a route, it will spit out that information in the console. If you needed additional information, you could put that in here. So let's go ahead and save that. Now, I previously had made a video on fetching data from a backend. Let's go ahead and fire up our server and say npm start. So our server is up and running. Our Node Express server is up and running. If you've not seen this video, I made a video on how to fetch data from an API. We created this simple application that just does a fetch. What it's doing is fetching data from a random user API. To convert this to fetch data from our API, all we need to do is change this to be the IP address where our server is living, and that would be 127.0.0.1 and 8080/users. And then when we're pulling out our response, we are not sending ourselves that crazy array that was sending, and so we would just do a data, and we're not sending results, so just data. Actually, it's not an object either. So you need to do that. You need to update this. This is now going to start as an array. So you would need to set this up like that, and then to see those values, you would need to update this. We don't want object.entries. We would just do and I'm going to change this so that this makes sense. Users, set users, and then here this will be users, this will be a user, and then here let's just do a user.id. That will be our key, and you can ignore that. That's just TypeScript because we didn't define what a user is going to look like inside of this array. TypeScript doesn't know. And then here, let's do a first name, and then this will be user dot first name, and then here last name, and we can get rid of all of that stuff we were doing before. Now all we need to do is just spit out user dot last name, and we can give that a save and fire up our front end. Let's do a Vite, do a localhost 5173 because it's a Vite application, and here we have our front end, and we can do a get our rando, except for this time it's not a rando, but it is in fact the users that we defined in our own backend. So there we have it. That was pretty sweet and pretty straightforward. That didn't even take us 20 minutes to create a NodeJS Express backend. We configured it to send data using a GET request. We also handled cores. We were not blocked by cores here. And we also did not get, we disabled the cached responses. So if I hit this again, it's going to run, and if we look at the console for our server, we can see that we got 2 successful requests to our Node.js server, both of status 200, meaning success. If we did not disable cached responses, the second request, it would have been a 304, and that just means that the resource that was being requested has not changed since the last time it was requested, so the browser can get stuffed, basically. Use the cached version that you have on your end is what it says. I hope that you guys have found this helpful and fun. In the next video, we're actually going to recreate this front end using Svelte. And the reason why is because Svelte freaking rocks, and if you don't know that, you need to know. So we're going to get into it, and I'm going to point out all of the differences in handling data and handling renders and all this API call stuff using Svelte versus React. You guys are really going to like this. I absolutely love Svelte so far. I've played with it a bit. I can't wait to shoot that video. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, have a great day.